Today is a different type of episode to what I normally do. So today I'm going to be tackling some tricky topics. And what I mean by that is I have very intentionally selected the kind of topics or questions that often get asked by my clients where it requires a bit of a discussion, or even the type of questions I see very common in Facebook groups where perhaps I disagree with the majority of what people are saying in the comments. So I've been a bit brave. I've put myself out on a limb today and I'm challenging some of these common opinions, common bits of advice, just so that we're all thinking, we're not just following one track because that's what everyone says. Because I think the reality is, as business owners, as educators, as people in the education space, it's really easy to get stuck in an echo chamber. And I have of late really reflected back to my corporate business training days to try and lean on things that I learned from there, because there was such a wide range of industries at the time. And also when it comes to online, I do connect with people from different industries. At the time of recording this, I am going to Atomicon. In fact, as this is released, I'll be at Atomicon, and that's a huge marketing conference for people from all walks of life, from different industries. And so I just want to bring some of that in here where we aren't just following the kind of common advice or the common opinions, but we're actually thinking about it so that we can mold it to suit our needs. Now, if you're new to the podcast, my name is Sumantha McMahon and I'm your host, and I'm really pleased you're here. And get ready for an action-packed and thinky kind of episode, one that's going to make you think. Enjoy. Welcome to the Upgrade Your Education Business podcast. I'm your host, Samantha, and I'm so pleased you're here. As an education business owner myself and a former teacher, I understand the nuances that only apply to us. So in this podcast, I share fluff-free, tailored and actionable ideas that you can mold to suit your needs. If you'd like to take this conversation further, please do reach out. I would love to meet you. And finally, it would mean the world to me if you could leave a review. That way, you'll be helping me help more people. Thank you for tuning in. Enjoy. Okay, I'm diving straight in with the first question, and that is, if a potential client asks for a discount, should you say yes? Should you even enter a negotiation? So this question came to me because I see so many threads online where someone asked the community what they should do about a parent who's perhaps asking for a discount. I know you've seen these too, and the comments are often filled with messages like, that's not the right client for you, just move on. It's your business, it's your rules. They can go somewhere else, and so on. Now, that's absolutely fine for people who, for whatever reason, don't need more clients. Maybe they're fully booked, they've got a waiting list. But how about the people who can't afford to say no? They need the clients, they don't want to say no, or, for whatever reason, you just really want the work. You don't need to justify it. Well, the good news is negotiating isn't the same as undervaluing yourself. I think that's where people sometimes get confused. Negotiating is a very legitimate sales strategy. In fact, we were taught it when I studied with the Institute of Sales. We're often put off with negotiation because people assume that it's about lowballing one another and seeing who wins. But the reality is that's not negotiation. Negotiation is creating a win-win situation. So, a quick way to kind of enter these kinds of conversations is to prepare by listing everything you offer within your normal fee and work out what you could reduce or drop if you gave someone a discount. You don't have to advertise this. This is just your preparation. And when you're doing this, make sure that it feels in proportion to the discount so you don't feel resentful. You could prepare these options beforehand so that they're fixed, or you can at least use that to guide you in a live conversation. The point is, you can work with someone else's budget if you need to or if you want to without undervaluing yourself. All you're doing is you're simply reducing what you're offering for that price. That keeps your value strong, your boundaries in place, and your client is happy too. It's a win-win situation. If you're in the Tutors Mastermind and you want a bit more of a detailed guide and view on how to handle this, then check out day 3 of the sales sprint we did in May 2025. Okay, we did that just recently. You'll find it in the training area. Now, let's move on to the second question. If someone breaches your terms and conditions, should you always enforce them? So let's say they've cancelled without giving you enough notice. Should you, without fail, enforce your terms and conditions? Now, I know this sounds like a bit of a weird question because, why wouldn't you? Your terms and conditions are there for a reason. But the reality is there are moments where we're not sure what to do because it could, for instance, affect the relationship between you and your client. Now, in these conversations, I see a lot of comparisons with other industries. My child goes to swimming classes and they don't care if we cancel, we have to pay anyway. And all of this can be true. But we might want to prioritize the relationships. We may want to prioritize the longevity. We may be at the beginning stages of our business where we're not very experienced in having these difficult conversations, and maybe we just need a little something else. So let me help you navigate this. Now, obviously, this has to be assessed on a case-by-case basis, but here are some pointers that might help. In my situation, when I put my private tutor hat on, I tend to work with people for a very long time, and they recommend me to others, and my business relies solely on word of mouth now. So let's say one of my long-standing clients suddenly cancels and they're outside of that cancellation window. I do take a view. I consider how often they do this, which generally is not very often, and whether the reason that they've given me is something I'm willing to forego. So has their child suddenly got ill? Have they been really busy at work? Loads has been going on and they totally forgot to tell me that their child had a doctor's appointment or whatever. I look at the reason. I might also consider the inconvenience to me. So let's say it's someone who's in a group class. Well, the class will still be going ahead with or without them. So it's not really a massive inconvenience in that respect. So in that situation, I might let them off. And if I do, whenever I do, I make it very clear that that's exactly what I'm doing. I refer to my terms and I say that I'm waiving them. But in most cases, if it does happen, my clients don't actually expect a refund. I take payment in advance because they know what my terms are and I've trained them very early on. This is how I train them. So let's say it's a brand new client and the same situation happens. I might enforce my terms, so I'm setting the right tone from day one, or I might let them off. But if I do, I make it very, very clear it's a one-off and I let them know that in the future, this is what will happen. So I'm setting that expectation. Now, this is how I operate because of the nature of my relationship with my clients and how I take payment. So let's say you take payment in blocks or you don't have long-term clients as such. You might take a different view. You see, it's sometimes an investment to make expectations for your clients who refer you or with whom you have a long-term relationship. And sometimes that investment looks like being a bit flexible. The point is that I think it isn't always black and white as enforcing terms and conditions no matter what, because sometimes making concessions is a longer term investment in the relationship that you have with them. Sure, I could compare myself to a big organization, but I'm not a big organization. This is a human to human relationship. I have a relationship with clients, with students, with their parents. Just later on in the summer, I'm going to a conference up north and I'm going for lunch at one of my students' families' houses. I did it last year as well. So, they don't take the mick out of me. They don't take advantage. And I also reciprocate with some of that leeway. And that's what works for me. There's no right and wrong. But the reason I'm pointing this out is because I have spoken to clients who feel really shaky about either enforcing terms or letting their clients off. They feel like they're allowing themselves to be walked all over. And I think a lot of it has to do with the narrative that we're surrounded by, that we are undervaluing ourselves if we let someone, get one over on us. But this is about relationships. So I think you have to take a view based on the situation and based on your relationship and based on what feels right. Trust your gut. More often than not, you're right. You're going to be more right than a community of people who don't know you, who don't know your business, and who they don't know about the relationship with your client. It's time for a new feature I'm trying out in the podcast, which is a masterminder moment. a real challenge from my membership that we're going to break down together. I often share how the smallest of tweaks can have the biggest of impacts. And a question about breadcrumbing on Facebook came from one of the masterminders, and this concept was really highlighted. Now, in case you're not sure what breadcrumbing is, it's a way to leave a metaphorical trail of breadcrumbs that lead people to where you want them to go. People often use this as a strategy on Facebook because they comment and post in Facebook groups filled with their target audiences, but it can be used in many places, for example, in your website copy. Anyway, one of the masterminders has been doing this for a while, and she was sharing posts from her business page. She wasn't getting any results, so she asked for my opinion. And a few people said they'd like to know as well. So I shared that posting from your business page or just repurposing posts into groups probably won't work effectively because it doesn't create that human connection. It's quite dry. Also, with the way Facebook is developing, using a profile is actually much more effective now than using a business page. I won't go into why, because this is just a short sound bite. Now, whether you're in the mastermind or not, let me tell you something that will really transform this. We need to remember that when it comes to digital marketing, what works in person is what works online. In person, there's a different relationship that you build with people if you were to, say, hand out a leaflet versus actually having a chat with them. The same concept applies here. If you're just sharing posts from your business page into groups, that's the equivalent of just handing out leaflets. It's very impersonal. I'm not saying that that won't work, and if it works for you, keep doing it. But if, like my clients, it's not getting results from you, think about how you can change it. I'll tell you the quick change that 2 of my clients this week have posted about. The change they made was instead of posting from their page, they posted from their profile. And just this week, 2 of them have posted inside the Mastermind Facebook group saying it has made a difference. They're getting not just likes and engagement, but one of them, as of today, got 2 inquiries overnight. So give it a go. Now, I touched on this just earlier, but it wasn't the focus. Here's the next question. Should you charge in blocks, like monthly or termly, or should you charge packages, or should you be charging by the hour? Now, this one is really interesting because a lot of coaches will say how you shouldn't charge by the hour. But the reality is you may want to for whatever reason. I mean, it's my preference. I never used to, but I do now. I charge weekly. But just because you're quoting an hourly rate doesn't mean that you are literally charging for the hour. You can weave in the time that you spend outside of that lesson into your pricing. So I don't think that the question is, should I say that this is how much I charge an hour, or should I be saying this is the block payment? I don't think that actually matters. That's just logistics. What actually matters is how have you calculated your pricing? Because you could charge termly, but your pricing model might still be leaving you short. You may still be effectively doing certain bits of work for free, for example. So I think the focus of that question is often misplaced. And, when you're thinking about this, it's about your communication. It's about your admin preferences. For some people, they're like, I can't cope with the admin of charging weekly, adjusting things. Well, for me, I can't cope with charging termly and then having to adjust things for people who may have cancelled or whatever. I just prefer to do it week by week. And as I mentioned earlier, things are generally very stable for me. I don't have a lot of admin, and that's why I make that choice. Maybe if I was getting loads of cancellations, I would take a different view. But the question here is more about your preference when it comes to that admin. It's not a question about whether you're pricing right. Whether you're pricing right is totally separate, regardless of how you communicate your pricing. So it really does depend on the level of protection you feel and how you're running things. When I launched groups, for instance, I charged in 6-week blocks. They were non-refundable, non-transferable. Now I work differently. And that's important. You can try things out and you can change your mind later. So I don't think there's a right and wrong answer to this on the face of it. But if we just strip that concept that sits behind the common advice around it, I agree. We should be taking more than the hour we're delivering whatever we deliver into account when we're working out your pricing. Right, let me move on to the next question. How do you sell something when the thing that people want seems to be something different. So, for example, what do you do about selling group classes if parents keep telling you they want one-to-ones? I couldn't exclude this question because it comes up all the time. Every single week I see it. Most clients ask me this question. It just comes up so much. Now, to be totally transparent, I am going to give you some really useful tips about this, but I'm not going to go into loads of depth because I have that training inside the Tutors Mastermind. I have a specific launch, teach and fill group class course, so it really wouldn't be fair to my clients if I just shared everything. But you know me, I will definitely share you something that is actionable, that's not, surface level. So the most common reason that I see people struggle with this actually boils down to their communication, the actual language they use when they're talking about things like their group class. I'm holding this as an example, but you can map this to whatever it is that you might be struggling to sell. So I'm going to use groups as an example. Make sure you adapt it. When it comes to groups, we have to start with two assumptions because me and you, we're not speaking right now. This is a podcast episode, so we have to make two assumptions. The first one is that the group environment is suitable for the learner in question. And assumption two is that we're not using the fact that your group class might be cheaper as the leading reason why someone should join. I'm just going to make that assumption. Some people will be in a situation where the fact that their groups are cheaper is a real selling point. But in most situations, when you use money as the leading factor in a decision-making conversation when it comes to sales, chances are you're not going to get that sale. Because when someone only wants to talk about the money and not the value and the benefit, they're in that kind of shopping around mentality, and chances are they're just going to make a decision based on who's the cheapest. So they're the two assumptions we're going to start with. So here's what typically happens. Tutors have a conversation with parents about their child's struggles perhaps. The parent then asks them what availability they have. The tutor explains the space they have in one of their group classes. The parent says, well, we'd prefer a one-to-one, and it goes from there. Here's how we're going to adapt the course of that conversation. When it gets to the question, what's your availability? You're not going to answer it. Instead, you're going to say that you'd like to make sure that you're recommending the right learning option for their child. So would it be okay for you to just ask a few more questions? Now, of course, change that wording depending on where you are in the conversation. But the point is, before you talk logistics, you should have a very clear idea of A, the exact challenges the learner is experiencing, and B, how your group class specifically helps with those challenges. So I'm not just talking generically like, great, let's do Wednesday at 4 p.m. for my group class. I want to make sure that I'm pitching my group class in a way that's completely aligned with what they have told me they're struggling with. That's how you connect. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, or if you work with me, you'll know that something I often say when it comes to marketing and sales is to meet people where they're at. And this is basically a very refined version of doing just that. So let's say you are struggling to sell group classes, and right now people just click a button on your website to join and you're struggling. Maybe start inviting people to calls, because when you speak to people, you are more likely to succeed. And then, once you've gained momentum, maybe you don't need to keep having those calls. Maybe people will just buy. But if you're struggling, give that a go. So when you're approaching these calls, think of it this way. You need to discuss what you offer in a way where someone is actually already sold before you get to the bit where you're talking about your group class and the prices, and work your way backwards from that goal. Keep that goal in mind and ask yourself, how can I ask the right questions, give the right responses to get to that point so that they're already sold? And actually, when we talk about my group class, we're just making arrangements. I'm not actually selling. So a really big takeaway from this episode is to make sure you're really thinking deeply about advice that you might be receiving in places like Facebook groups, even from your mentor or your coach, even if you work with me, whoever, make sure you're thinking about it. It's really good to challenge advice or to at least interrogate it, because that's when you create something that's a perfect fit for you and your audience. I hope this episode has made you think, and I don't usually do this, but if you have any specific questions you would love answered on this podcast, please come and find me online. I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and pop me a message, because what I do with these questions is I store them, and every now and again I kind of do this kind of question and answer style episode, so I will save them for the next time I do this. Now, in the meantime, have a great rest of your week, and you'll hear from me on Wednesday. Would you like to take this discussion further? Perhaps you have some questions or you'd like more ideas on tailoring your business. If so, book a free discovery call through the link in the show notes.